Closed captioning for Lakeland Currents is supported by the Minnesota Department of Commerce, Telecommunications Access Minnesota, and Nisswa Tax Service. Nisswa Tax Service, tax preparation for businesses and individuals. Across from City Hall in Nisswa and online at nisswatax.com.
Hi, and welcome to Lakeland Currents. I'm Dan Hegstead. I'm substituting for Ray Gildow this week. Our guests are Tanya Helt from the Women's Center of Mid-Minnesota Women's Shelter. She's on my far right, and to my immediate right is Naomi Hansen, who is a former resident of the shelter and is now on the board of directors of the Women's Center. So we will learn more about that this evening. We have a lot of questions, and we'll start out with this piece produced by our Hannah Tran from Lakeland News.
There's rarely a time when Brainerd's Women's Center is not full. Women often face the cruel realities of domestic abuse.
We are always very busy. We are always getting calls.
Their aid is simply providing the closest feeling to home, from dining rooms to playrooms for children.
Everything that we do here is to try and keep things, especially for women and their children, to make everything as normal as possible.
Helt says public awareness and communication gives the center its strengths, especially with local authorities.
One of the steps that the officers do is the first thing they do is they give them the contact information about the shelter.
It's common and routine for police officers to give out cards just like this one in situations of domestic violence. This card contains numbers for helpful resources within this area.
Our agencies collaborated in coming up with one police card. Victims of all different crimes could contact the correct agency.
The Women's Center strives to maintain ties with various entities to provide a solid, systematic response.
The fact that we are out there and that people know we are here to serve battered women, I think it's amazing.
It's unfortunate for Helt that so many women are seeking help, but she's thankful that they're aware that help is nearby. Hannah Tran, Lakeland News.
Well, let's start out by giving you the website for the Women's Center. It's womenscenteronline.com. .org. It's .org. I should know that. I do. I handle your website, but I don't have to look it up. So, womenscenteronline.org, and all the information is at that website, including phone numbers and so forth. So, first of all, we were talking. Is it a shelter or a center? What officially it is?
Officially, it is the Mid-Minnesota Women's Center.
Okay.
It's also referred to as the Women's Center of Mid-Minnesota, the Women's Shelter. The actual name of the organization is the Mid-Minnesota Women's Center. But the shelter we actually renamed 2 years ago when our founder and previous director retired. And so the building, the shelter itself, is renamed the A. Louise Salisky Battered Women's Shelter.
Okay. So the reason I bring that up is because you have the shelter and then many, many other programs too. So let's talk about first about the shelter, the need for the shelter, and those sorts of safety issues too. Women, what would be a typical scenario for a woman in an abusive situation? Does what?
Well, hopefully a woman in an abusive situation will give us a call or stop in or come there. Generally, we work with a lot of other agencies, so we work with law enforcement. They'll refer a woman if they're responding to a domestic situation. They'll either refer the woman or bring the woman to the shelter.
And is in the piece that Hannah made, they'll get a card that informs them of the situation and where they can go for service.
Yep.
So that's where many would come from?
Yes. They give them a referral card. They can call one of the 3 agencies on there. We are on there, the Women's Center number for domestic violence, and then Sexual Assault Services is on there, and Crowing Victim Services. So and they can call any one of those numbers and get hooked up with the appropriate services.
Okay. And those are all on your website, too,
yes.
I believe? They better be. So if a woman decides she wants to leave an abusive situation and come to the shelter, what happens? What's that process like?
Well, from my perspective, for me, having been in that situation, it takes all kinds of situations for a woman to finally decide to go and to seek help. In my particular situation, there had been domestic abuse between my husband and I, but it took my husband actually hitting my child to come. And I had actually been a donator and so knew where the location was, but here's kind of what happens. I knock on the door and you come in, and there's actually a process that you go through, and I wasn't even sure if I qualified to be there. I was a person who worked in, finance and was a leader in a group. So maybe not what people would think of as a typical person who would want to reach out to the women's shelter. But they take everyone, and it's probably one of the misnomers about women who have been abused is that they fit a certain type, but in fact it happens all over across economical backgrounds. But when you come in, I had my daughters with me, and they welcomed us immediately, and there's a process that we went through, and you answered questions, and honestly, that process in and of itself helps you if you've ever even thought, like, am I abused or not, very quickly pinpoints for you that, I am in a bad situation here. And what happens is they get you settled into a room. They provide you everything. I mean, I walked into that place with nothing except for my children and their backpacks, honestly. So you're given a room. We were given bedding. I mean, just everything you can think of, towels and sundries, clothing for my children, coats. It was, wintertime, shoes, underwear, anything that you can think of that you might need. So we had shelter. Obviously, they have a kitchen, so you're fed, and all of these fabulous resources that can help you move forward from wherever you're at. So, for example, I needed to get an order for protection in place immediately so that my husband could not pick, or my ex-husband couldn't get my children from school. That was like the thing I was most concerned about, is how did I keep my children safe? Because life goes on. The thing is, once you leave, there's all of this stuff that's occurring, and they have all these resources for you to kind of move forward. So I had an advocate help me with the whole writing an OFP and going to court with me to petition the judge. So filling all that paperwork and contacting a lawyer, there's so much involved, and it's really kind of overwhelming. And that's the kind of support that they can bring and help you through that process.
And you had more resources than many women who come to the shelter, too.
Honestly,
but the situation was still the same.
The situation's the same, and I felt fortunate that I had, to be very frank about it. I mean, I went to the bank and under their advisement, and I at least got some of my money out and into my own account so that I wasn't blocked from it. Mm-hmm. But so many women that I met in there have nothing. They may be stay-home parents or whatever, but they are locked out of everything. You have to understand that when someone leaves, typically they're fleeing, and they absolutely have nothing. So women who have no access to money, health care, any of those things, this, again, is such an important resource for our community, for all kinds of women, but in particular for women who have nothing.
And it's very complicated. There's far more than we can get into here in 27 and a half minutes, but I know the website has a lot of links, and there are many more resources available, too, for information. And Naomi was nice enough to record your story, and we made it into about a 15-minute video that's on the Women's Center website right now. So it's on the front page. Click here to view Naomi's story. Thank you for doing that. So the full story is there. How many rooms, how many can you house at the shelter?
That's such a tough question. Our maximum capacity that we are considered at max capacity is 16.
Okay.
However, I would have to say that many times we are over that, which absolutely we can handle the capacity of being over that. It just makes it a little more difficult because it is community living. It's it makes it difficult to provide really honed services when you have a lot of people in there. Mm-hmm. I don't think that we haven't been full for a long time. So
Okay.
we are generally almost always full, and if we are not, we are probably have a few beds open for maybe no longer than a week, and we're full again.
Okay. Okay. And I noticed a doghouse.
We are one of the only shelters, and if not, we're the first shelter in Minnesota to allow families to bring their pets.
In fact, when we went there, we were concerned about our cats, and we were actually able to bring our cats. You know, my girls each had a cat, and they're very attached to it. And the whole issue with them being in the house with Jeff, you know, was a frightening prospect. So just that little thing, having those cats there, just made the experience that much better. It's very difficult to go into a situation like that. You know, everyone's off kilter anyway, being out of your home and living in a community place. But having those pets there for my girls made all the difference in the world.
And, you know, I remember reading that was an issue, getting folks to evacuate from hurricanes and so forth. They didn't want to leave their pets, but, you know, so that's an issue. It's the reality, so it's important, and it's good that you do that. It's yeah. And so you've got a lot of volunteers. I know that. You mentioned advocacy and help with paperwork and so forth. Is that done with all volunteers, some, or what?
We have a very full staff of advocacy, which is fantastic, but we rely on volunteers for a lot of different things, from answering phones to doors to working with children to keeping an eye on children while moms are trying to fill out paperwork, while they're trying to go to appointments. We have volunteers that help with maintaining the building, painting, working on things around the building for us. We have volunteers that help us with fundraising, and we have volunteers that help us with just about anything that we can't staff. We have an awesome group of volunteers. In fact, when I was putting together my information for today, we had over 4,000 hours of volunteering last year from people in the community, and I just think that's amazing that, you know, that's 4,000 hours that people in the community put into working with women and children for the benefit of their community. So,
and if folks want to volunteer, again, probably the best thing to do is go to the website.
Absolutely.
WomenCenterOnline.org.
We're always looking for volunteers.
Okay.
So.
And the phone number?
The phone number for the Women's Center is 218-828-1216.
828-1216.
Yes.
Okay. All right, and they could call that number and volunteer, or if you need more information or help or whatever, 828-1216 is a good number to call. Okay. Alex and Brandon Child Safety Center. I was shocked when I heard about the Child Safety Center, that there is enough need for safe exchanges that we have to have a whole building and infrastructure for that. But there it is. Is it 10 years now? Or close to it.
It was built in 2000.
Okay. So tell us what happens at the Alex and Brandon Child Safety Center.
The Alex and Brandon Child Safety Center was actually built in 2000. It was the first building constructed specifically for supervised visitations and exchanges. And it was named after Alex and Brandon Frank, who were murdered by their father. They attended the Women's Center support group. Their mother was on the board of directors and works at the Women's Center. And she had petitioned the courts to not have unsupervised visitation, but to have supervised visitation. He was granted unsupervised, and he murdered them in 1996 on an unsupervised visit, and then hence the Alex and Brandon Child Safety Center. Okay. So, and last year alone, we did over 300 exchanges and almost 1,400 supervised visits.
So from like my situation, what was nice when I went into court to ask for that order for protection, we were able to also at the same time offer not to keep my ex-husband from the children, but rather offer a situation where he could still and they could still see each other, but in a situation that was tightly monitored. because it's, again, the dangers that can occur when there's some separation. There's a lot of anger, and from my children's perspective, very nervous and afraid to see their dad. So there's very tight controls that are put in place, and it allowed the girls and my ex to be able to have time together, but again, in a very tightly controlled situation. And then also for people who don't get along after divorce, where it's very contentious, having that interaction is not a good thing. So again, it's a neutral place where the people, the two ex-spouses or estranged people don't have to actually interact, and they really are an intermediary. That you come in one direction and they come in another, and then they meet in the middle, and the parents don't even
or
have
at
to
different
interact.
times.
Or at different. It actually is at different times.
Yeah.
So it keeps everybody safe and keeps things down at a manageable control.
Okay. And then there's a fundraiser, I think, in the fall specifically for the Alex and Brandon Child Safety Center.
Yes,
And
we have the Invest in Kids Breakfast every October. It's the first Thursday every October at the Black Bear Restaurant. Mm-hmm. And it's our big fundraiser for the Alex and Brandon Child Safety Center. We call it the Invest in Kids Breakfast because our slogan for that has always been give a kid an hour. The cost that it costs the safety center to have a supervised visitation for staffing and having the building is around, I think it's $50. And we provide the services on a sliding fee scale. We don't want any child to be put in the middle or to compromise anybody's safety, so we don't turn people away. But we still have to cover the cost to provide the services, and so we ask people that participate in the breakfast to buy their breakfast for $50. And during the breakfast, they get to, we usually have speakers that talk about child abuse prevention. There's usually some entertainment. It's kind of it's a sad situation, but it's a really great breakfast.
And that will be coming up in October, so we've got some time. Folks can look for more publicity as we go down, or
Absolutely.
On the website. It'll
Absolutely.
be there, too. The Women's Center has been around since, I think, the late 70s, and then built a new facility in the 80s, I want to say. 80s or 90s? When was it?
93.
93. Okay.
1978, we
All
were
right.
founded, and we were originally in a house.
Mm-hmm.
And in 1993, the new facility was built.
Okay. And talk about the funding. You're doing a lot of fundraising, but that can't begin to cover the costs.
We rely on part of our funding to come from actually state funding, which is funded through the Department of Public Safety. And then the other part of our funding, we rely heavily on our fundraising and private donors and individual donors and grants and,
Whatever we can find to
Yep.
keep things going.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And from individuals, too. So
Absolutely.
Primarily from individuals,
Yep.
and so it's the volunteer hours and the individual contributions that, in the end, make all of the difference in the world, Dan.
Okay. And I know there's a Donate Now button on the website.
Yep.
I just happen to know that. Well, and there's also a needs list that gets put on the website, too. Here's what we need for this season, for the fall.
And we have a big one for this fall we'd like to talk about, right, Tanya?
Yes.
The big need, so this facility is fabulous, and I do want to say one other thing for anyone that's ever considering coming there, if I can digress for one
Please.
moment. For women who go there, one of the big things for me is your safety. And the thing is, there's high fences all the way around, and there's actually a very secure security system in place. So it's the maintenance of all of that, and obviously since 1993, there's been some aging of some things. The big thing this year that we have got to try to fund is the heating system, and we actually have 3 big units that need to be replaced. And we are looking to try to raise $20,000 to replace that system so we can keep it warm, obviously, during any cooler months, which is about 8 months of the year for us, obviously here in this part of Minnesota. So that's one area we'd really like to reach out to the community and get some help for.
It sounds, 93 doesn't sound like that long ago, but it's 20 years.
Right?
Yes.
So it's time for some new furnaces. So, okay.
Anything you want to add to that?
No, other than, there's always something, but anything
Right.
that anybody can
Well, like any
contribute,
house, you're going
right?
to it needs everything.
So, I mean,
So-
it's always an ongoing project, but, we live in, we're so fortunate to live in the Lakes community just because this community is so great about helping out with a lot of different things. So,
You know, one thing I thought of that you told me about that I'd like to share, and something I hadn't thought about, because when women come in there and they make that choice to move on themselves, again, I go back to they start with nothing. And some things that have happened in the recent past, and I can turn the ball back over to you, where people actually donated everything in their house.
Oh,
Because you think about it, if
You
a
need
woman's going
everything.
into an apartment, she has nothing. So while that seems like a lot, but if you have furniture or plates and pots and pans, even things like that can be so helpful to the women who are starting new lives so that they can move forward.
we donated toys as the kids outgrew them. So, and I still see some of them there. So they're pretty tough toys. So that's good. Folks can donate cell phones too. Is that right?
they can. We have a lot of different types of cell phone programs. One of them is that we repurpose the cell phones for 911 phones.
And that if I understand that right, I've donated old cell phones. They go somewhere where they get wiped clean, and any cell phone, even if you don't have a service plan for it, can call 911.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes, it is. And so that way, sometimes, and we take that for granted that everybody has a cell phone. But sometimes, if you're sharing a cell phone plan with your spouse or your partner and you leave that relationship, one of the first things that they do is either harass you to no end on your cell phone to the point where you never want to answer it, or they shut it off.
Right.
And so then women have no way to call, especially in an emergency situation. If they're heading out and all of a sudden they have a stalker or somebody following them, it's really hard to call for services. So we do work with cell phone donation. We also recycle old cell phones with a program called Shelter Alliance.
Okay.
And so we're actually able to get funds from Shelter Alliance for recycling phones that can no longer be used if they're broken.
So if folks have old cell phones, what should they do with them?
They can drop them off at the shelter.
Okay. Any other locations that
You
can
can give
take
us a
them?
call. You could drop them off. Well, that I'm aware of, no.
Okay.
I suppose that you could drop them off at the shelter or call the shelter to find
Okay.
out. When we're doing different events, a lot of people will bring.
Right.
That's
Well,
another good idea, yeah.
And speaking of events, I got to talk about the walk a mile in her shoes.
Oh, of course.
Because, Dan, you look great in a pair of high heels.
Yes, you do.
Thank you. I bought my own high heels.
Aren't they red?
They are not red.
I
No,
know they
they're
should be, though.
And for high heels, they're about as comfortable as you can get, and that's not saying much. But it's a men's march to support the Women's Center and Sexual Assault Services, and we walk a mile in high heels, and it's a fundraiser. And it's a lot of fun, and it's pretty silly, but it's for a good cause. So that will be coming up August 10th. And again, that's on the website. Folks can just make a donation or walk or whatever. And I would assume you could bring cell phones there.
Yes.
Now, and then there's the Green Sneakers program, too. That's pretty slick, where if you've got old sneakers, tennis shoes, you can donate them, and the Women's Center gets so much a pound, as I recall, for those. So that's a fundraiser. But then your shoes that are still usable go to somebody who may not have any shoes, or they get chopped up and repurposed.
Yeah, recycled into
Recycled.
roads.
Recycled.
I think.
And those, I know, can be dropped off at Mills Ford. They have a bin, or Pamela's Hair Studio on Washington, or on Oak Street has a bin also. So green sneakers, or bring them to the Walk a Mile.
Yep, bring them to Walk a Mile, or you can drop them off at the Women's Center.
Okay, that sounds good. We're just about out of time, but there's so much to talk about. We just appreciate so much that you're there. You're one of the first women's shelters out of the Twin Cities in Minnesota, as I recall. Is that so? And there are more now, but still not many. How large a service area do you cover? I know Lakeland TV is seen over most of Minnesota, so there are people watching who are not in your service area, but
we actually, our funding covers a 5-county area. We will serve anybody in the state. If they are, we work with a network of shelters. Yeah. Obviously, if it's not safe for somebody to stay in their area, we work with other shelters to get people somewhere where their abuser will not find them. The 5 counties we are funded for is Crow Wing, where we are located, Cass, Morrison, Wadena, and Todd counties. So, and all of those counties have advocacy programs, but they do not have shelters.
Really?
So we are the closest shelter in this area. The next closest shelter would be Anna Marie's in St. Cloud, and then north of us would be Duluth.
Okay.
And while I was there, we did have women, several women who came from, we had one family who came from Iowa. So they really do take it seriously. If you're in a really bad situation, to get you out of an area, that sharing really becomes an important thing to get you away from a really bad and dangerous situation.
Okay. I want to mention the website again, and just because there's so much information there, and there's so much we can't get to here, but at womencenteronline.org, right?
Right.
And I know there's the checklist. Am I in an abusive situation? Because you said you may not realize, what is abuse? Verbal abuse is abuse. And
there's so many different kinds of abuse. I mean, the interesting thing about being in an abusive situation is that you're in denial for most people. And probably the thing that the public has the most difficulty with is in those situations where a person goes and comes back and goes and comes back. The thing I'd like to say to you is be patient, and if you can always just help that person and support them and get them towards the resources that are available. For me, myself, and I think there's a lot of people that fall in my category too, where we just don't tell anyone. No one even has any clue that this is going on in their life.
828-1216, womencenteronline.org. Tanya, Naomi, thank you for being on Lakeland Currents tonight. I'm Dan Hegstead for Ray Gildow. Thanks for watching.